Know that feeling when something's off, but you can't put your finger on it? Not a fight, not a red flag waving in your face, just a feeling, small, quiet. The kind you'd talk yourself out of because the alternative is too big to hold. That's where Sarah was for about 3 weeks before her whole life split in half. She was 34, married 7 years, one kid, an 8-year-old boy named Eli, sweet, a little shy, obsessed with dinosaurs the way only 8-year-olds can be. Her husband, Mark, was 36, an engineer, the kind of guy who fixed things around the house without being asked, who remembered her coffee order, who she used to describe, when people asked how her marriage was going, as boring in a good way. She used to say that like it was a compliment, because it was. They lived in one of those neighborhoods where everyone knows everyone. Cul-de-sac. Block parties twice a year. The kind of place where your kids ride bikes to a friend's house without you worrying because somebody's mom is always watching from a porch somewhere. Next door lived Emily and Dave. Emily was 32, Dave was 35. They'd moved in about 2 years earlier, and honestly, Sarah liked them. Emily especially. They weren't best friends, not the kind who show up unannounced with wine, but they were friendly. Emily would wave from her driveway. Sometimes they'd chat for 20 minutes about nothing, school pickup lines, the weather, some show they were both watching. And somewhere in there, Sarah noticed her husband and Emily got along too. Not in a way that screamed anything. That's the thing nobody tells you about betrayal. It almost never screams. It whispers. It shows up as friendly, as they just click, as Mark offering to help carry Emily's groceries in, or the two of them laughing a little too easily at a barbecue while Sarah was inside grabbing napkins. She noticed. And she brushed it off. Because what else are you supposed to do? Accuse your husband of something based on a feeling? Accuse your friendly neighbor of something because she laughs at his jokes? You'd sound insane. You'd sound insecure. So she folded the feeling up small and put it away, the way most of us do, and kept living her life. Here's where it gets interesting. Because Sarah wasn't the type to snoop. She wasn't checking his phone at night or tracking his location. She trusted him. That's not naive. That's just what 7 years of marriage is supposed to feel like. But a few weeks ago, something happened that she couldn't explain away with a shrug. Mark told her he had a late meeting. Said he'd be home around 9. Nothing unusual. He traveled for work sometimes, had late calls sometimes. She put Eli to bed, watched some TV, fell asleep on the couch waiting for him. And then, around 11, she woke up, alone. His side of the bed still made. His car wasn't in the driveway. Now, if you've never lived through a moment like that, let me tell you what it does to your body. It's not panic right away. It's this strange, cold stillness. Your brain starts doing math it doesn't want to do. You tell yourself there's an explanation. You tell yourself you're being crazy. And underneath all of that, some older, quieter part of you already knows. She texted him. No response. She called, straight to voicemail, and then, she doesn't fully know what made her do this, maybe instinct, maybe that folded-up feeling finally unfolding itself. She looked out her bedroom window, toward the house next door. Dave's truck wasn't in the driveway either. Now here's what you have to understand about Sarah. She's not impulsive. She didn't storm outside in her pajamas. She didn't call Dave right then and accuse anybody of anything based on 2 missing vehicles, because 2 missing vehicles could mean 100 boring things. So she waited. And waiting, when your gut is screaming at you, might be one of the hardest things a person can do. Around 1 in the morning, she heard a car pull into the driveway next door. Not hers. Not loud. Careful, almost. The kind of careful that, if you're being honest with yourself, only makes sense if someone doesn't want to be heard. 15 minutes later, her own driveway. Mark came in trying to look normal. Said the meeting ran long. Said traffic was bad. said a few other things that probably would have worked on a woman who hadn't spent the last 2 hours doing math in the dark. She didn't say anything that night. Isn't that wild? She just watched him get ready for bed, watched him kiss her on the forehead like it was any other night. And she lay there next to him thinking about the sound of that careful car pulling into the driveway next door. She wasn't sure yet, not completely, but something in her had already started building a case. Over the next week, Sarah didn't accuse, she watched. She noticed Mark suddenly needed to run errands on Tuesday afternoons, the exact window when Dave, she happened to know from a passing conversation months earlier, coached his son's Little League practice 2 towns over. Convenient. She noticed Emily's car sometimes wasn't in her driveway at the same times Mark said he was at the gym, even though his gym bag came home suspiciously dry. You'd be amazed what you start noticing once you start looking. Little inconsistencies that used to slide right past you suddenly stack up like bricks. And then came the moment that changed everything. Mark left his laptop open on the kitchen counter one evening while he went to grab something from the garage. She wasn't trying to snoop. She says that, and honestly I believe her, because up until that point, she hadn't been the type to go digging. But an email notification popped up on the screen. A shared calendar invite. Title, Coffee. Usual spot. Sender, Emily. Now, a coffee invite isn't proof of an affair. People get coffee. Neighbors get coffee. But it was the usual spot that got her. Usual implies a pattern. Implies history. Implies this wasn't the first time. And it wasn't going to be the last. She clicked into the calendar. And there it was. Weeks of them. Recurring. Some labeled coffee. One, from the night his car wasn't in the driveway, simply labeled with a single letter. E. I want to pause here for a second, because I think it's easy to fly past this part when you're just listening to a story. But imagine being her in that kitchen. Imagine standing there, laptop glowing, your husband 30 feet away in the garage, your son asleep upstairs with his dinosaur nightlight on, and in front of you is proof. Not a feeling anymore, not a maybe, proof that the last several weeks of your life have been a performance. She didn't cry, not yet. She says the crying came later, in the shower, where the water could explain it if anyone asked. In that moment, standing in her kitchen, she says she felt something closer to clarity than heartbreak. Like her whole body had just switched from confused to focused, because now she had a decision to make. And it wasn't just about Mark anymore. See, a lot of people, when they find out, they explode. That night, right there, screaming, crying, throwing things, waking the whole house up. And honestly, nobody would blame her for that. But Sarah did something different, something colder, something, if I'm being honest, that takes a specific kind of strength most people don't have in that moment. She closed the laptop, she went to bed, and for the next several days, she played a version of herself that Mark would recognize. Normal. A little tired maybe, but who isn't? She made dinner. She asked about his day. She let him believe completely that his secret was still a secret. Because here's what Sarah understood. Even in the middle of all that pain, the moment you tip your hand, you lose control of the story. And she wasn't ready to lose control. Not yet. Not until she had all the pieces. So she gathered them. Screenshots of the calendar saved somewhere he'd never think to look. Timestamps that lined up with his late meetings. A pattern, laid out clean and undeniable, the kind of evidence that doesn't leave room for a clever explanation. And then she thought about Dave. This is the part of the story that I think makes it different from every other cheating story you've heard 100 times. Because Sarah could have just left, packed a bag, taken Eli, filed for divorce and let Mark explain himself to a lawyer instead of her. A lot of people would have done that. Nobody would have questioned it, but she kept thinking about Dave. Dave, who she'd waved to 100 times from her driveway. Dave, who had no idea his own wife was spending her Tuesday afternoons in a coffee shop with the husband next door. Dave, who was, in every sense that mattered, exactly as betrayed as she was, except he didn't even know it yet. She said later, in her own words, that letting him stay in the dark felt almost like being complicit, like if she only dealt with her side of it, quietly, privately, she'd be protecting the two people who least deserved protecting. So she decided not just to leave Mark, but to make sure the truth landed on every doorstep it belonged on. Here's how she did it. She didn't want a shouting match on the lawn. She didn't want a scene the whole cul-de-sac would gossip about for a year, with half the story missing and everyone picking sides based on rumors. She wanted something cleaner, something undeniable. So on a Saturday morning, Mark at the gym, or so he claimed, she walked over to Dave's house, knocked. When he opened the door, she asked if she could talk to him for a minute, just the two of them. Now picture Dave's face in that doorway. A completely normal Saturday, coffee in hand probably. No idea his entire understanding of his marriage was about to be rewritten in the next 10 minutes. She didn't yell, she didn't cry, not at first. She simply told him what she'd found. The calendar, the pattern, the dates that lined up with nights his wife said she was out with friends. She showed him the screenshots, and she watched his face change in real time. The way disbelief moves into confusion, and confusion moves into that specific, sinking kind of understanding that only comes when pieces you didn't know were missing suddenly click into place. He didn't say much. What do you say? She said later that the silence in that doorway was one of the loudest things she'd ever heard. Word got out fast after that. Of course it did. You can't have a moment like that on a quiet street and expect it to stay contained. By that evening, Dave had confronted Emily. By that night, the whole street practically knew, even if nobody said it out loud yet. You could feel it in the way curtains twitched, in the way nobody quite made eye contact at the mailbox the next morning. And Mark came home from the gym to find his wife sitting at the kitchen table, calm, composed, a folder in front of her. She didn't scream at him either. She said she'd actually planned to, rehearsed it even, in the shower, in the car, in those quiet moments when the anger would surge up out of nowhere. But when the moment actually came, all that anger had somewhere else to go. It had already been spent, precisely and on purpose, at Dave's front door. So instead, she just told him she knew. Told him she'd known for days, told him what she'd done that morning. And watched him realize there was no version of this where he got to control the narrative anymore. I think what makes this story stick with people isn't just the affair. Affairs happen. People cheat, people get caught, people cry, people move on or they don't. That part, as painful as it is almost predictable. What makes this different is what Sarah chose to do with the truth once she had it. She could have kept it private, handled her own divorce quietly, let Emily and Dave's marriage limp along in ignorance. A lot of people would call that the mature choice, the not my business choice, but Sarah didn't see it that way. She saw a man who deserved to know the truth about his own life, and in giving him that truth, she wasn't just protecting Dave. She was making sure the two people who broke something didn't get to walk away clean. No quiet divorce papers signed behind closed doors while everyone else stayed comfortably unaware. No chance for Mark and Emily to keep seeing each other under some flimsy excuse once the dust settled. Both marriages ending separately, both betrayals staying hidden. She turned two private betrayals into two public reckonings at the exact same moment, so neither of them could hide behind the other's silence. That's not petty. That's precision. When she posted about it online, not looking for advice really, more just needing somewhere to put all of it, the response was immediate. Within a day, thousands of people had read her story, thousands more had opinions. And you can imagine what the internet does with a story like this. Half the comments were people cheering her on, calling her a genius, calling what she did chef's kiss levels of justice. The other half were asking the harder questions. Was it her place to tell Dave? Did she do it for him? Or did she do it, at least a little, for herself? For the satisfaction of watching Mark lose control of his own secret? And honestly, maybe it was both. Maybe it doesn't have to be one or the other. Maybe you can do the right thing and also want to watch the person who hurt you lose something in the process. Those two things aren't as far apart as we like to pretend. Last anyone heard, Sarah had filed for divorce. Mark moved out, staying with his brother a few towns over, still trying, apparently, to convince people this whole thing was complicated. As if complicated is a word you get to use after you've spent weeks lying to your wife's face over dinner. Dave and Emily's situation, from what people gathered, didn't survive either, which I think most people expected. Some betrayals you can maybe survive as a couple, if you're willing to do the excruciating work of rebuilding. This wasn't that kind. Not when the betrayal came wrapped in months of quiet, deliberate lying to two people at once. And Sarah, she's still in that house for now, with Eli, still doing school pickup, still waving probably to whichever neighbors are left to wave to. Somebody in the comments asked her if she regretted telling Dave. If, looking back, she wished she'd just kept it between herself and Mark. Her answer was short. He deserved to know what his life actually was. I wasn't going to be the only one who knew and said nothing. There's something about that answer that stays with me, because so much of what makes betrayal feel unbearable isn't just the lie itself. It's the loneliness of being the only one who knows the truth, while everyone else keeps living inside the lie. Sarah didn't just find out her husband was cheating, she made sure nobody else had to live in that lie a single day longer than she did. And maybe that's not revenge in the way we usually think about it. No screaming, no smashed windshield, no dramatic showdown on a front lawn, just the truth, delivered calmly, delivered completely, delivered to exactly the person who needed to hear it. Sometimes, that's the loudest kind of justice there is.